Hey guys, this is it. This is the final countdown, the last day for AP European history for at least the year 2017, 2018. Who knows what the future will hold? But we're going to go and kind of cut and not do the whole thing. It's kind of like bright in here. All right, working on the lights. Oh, okay, that's better. You might not be able to see me very well, but that's okay. I'm actually over to the bed. This is where I did the first Perdeo on this bed way back in like June. So here we go. The final countdown, the rest of AP European history in 10 short topics. And I might take a break and do half and half. So start with number 10. So Yugoslavia was an area in the Balkans. Of course, it was the old Serbia, Bosnia, all these countries were combined into Yugoslavia after World War One, and that's basically how they stayed throughout the Cold War as a communist country. Well, when the Iron Curtain falls, Yugoslavia itself after 1991 will break apart, and you have civil war that breaks out amongst all of these different areas, because what you have are all these independent countries here aiming for their independence, right? So they're trying to break off from the bigger Yugoslavia, which had been previously dominated by Serbia. Well, Serbia wants to keep these independent or perhaps independent states to be a larger part of Yugoslavia because that makes Serbia stronger. So they're fighting to keep Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia from breaking away. Well, they break away. And so Serbia is going to target, at least, target your closest neighbor. They're going to go after Bosnia to try to keep them in this Yugoslavia thing. And Serbians who are living in this new Bosnia, which is the capital of Sarajevo, they did not want to be a part of this new Bosnia, right? They want to be a part of Serbia. 30% of this new Bosnia were actually Serbs. So they do not want to be the minority. They've been used to being the majority. So the Serbian government will start attacking this Muslim-dominated state of Bosnia, and they are going to try to ethnically cleanse. Okay, it's a new term that the Serbs actually propagate during this time. Ethnic cleansing. How about that handwriting, huh? Ethnic cleansing of Bosnian Muslims, trying to get them out of the area so the Serbs are the majority. Intense civil war for 3 years. There's peace accords that are signed in 1995, and of all places, Dayton, Ohio. Okay, who knew? But in any case, that conflict is settled down. But a couple years later, Serbia is at it again. Its leader, whose name is Slobodan Milosevic, later attacks the region of Kosovo, looking to ethnically cleanse that area of Albanian Muslims who lived in the region. So he's trying to, well, you know what, if we can have Bosnia, if they're going to be independent, then we're going to try to at least have a pure Serbia by kicking out all of the people who aren't ethnically Serb. So ethnic cleansing continues, but this time of Albanian Muslims. Well, now, with this continued campaign with Milosevic doing all these things, you're going to see NATO step up, and a U.S.-led NATO coalition is going to attack through airstrikes Serbia, and Milosevic will be removed from power. So it's just the 90s are a very peaceful time across the world, post-World War II, obviously, but the Cold War, 1991 throughout the 90s, but the Balkans were certainly a place of nationalist tension, and this ethnic cleansing that Milosevic led is the worst kind of example of that. Now, let's take a step back and let's look at the way the world was in 1900, right? Look at this, 1900, everybody's got land in Africa and Asia. It's great, but eventually those colonies get a little old, and Europe will go through a period called decolonization throughout the end of the 20th century. Now, why do the colonies go, and why do the colonies become independent? Well, several causes. First of all, it costs money to maintain your empire. Second, it's hard to fight the Nazis and say, hey, you shouldn't conquer other places, and yet have colonies of your own. And then these countries, England, France, and others in Western Europe are going to be more concerned with rebuilding their own country rather than administering colonies abroad. So you do see, though, some colonies go reluctantly. India goes from England in 1948, that movement led by this guy right here, Mahatma Gandhi. But probably the best example of a reluctant letting go and a bad breakup would be Algeria, where the French government did not really want to let Algeria go, and there are protests, and there are barricades, and there's all sorts of chaos in France in the year 1958, and eventually France has to let Algeria go by 1962. So it was not a very great time to be in France around the turn of the 50s to 60s because of this conflict over the question of Algeria. And that conflict did not end very smoothly. So the French let go of Algeria. Oh, there's Queen Elizabeth. Good times. Now, we've talked with decolonization there. We've talked a lot about Europe going out into the world. Well, what happens when the world comes to Europe? And we start to see that as we get into the 20th century. Now, remember, the Marshall Plan had restored the economies of Western Europe. That economic miracle had brought immigration into Europe for jobs. And these jobs are filled by what are called guest workers. Now, the connotation of guest worker is that you're a guest, right? So eventually you're going to leave. However, after their visas go and after a certain term, a lot of them don't leave. And they stay, and they bring their different cultures from around the world. And then combine that with an economic downturn in the 1970s, and now you've got a lack of jobs, and yet you also have competition from foreign workers. So that combination, foreign cultures in your presence, competition for jobs, are going to create a lot of resentment. And as the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s have gone on, there has been a very large question of Muslim immigration into Europe in particular, and the questions about the role of religion in public life. How do you assimilate these radically different cultures from Western Europe into the Western Europe fold, or should you assimilate those cultures? So that has created this tension that has played itself out in France in particular with things like the burqa ban. Or the hijab being banned in French public schools to retain that air of secularism. So the question is, again, with this immigration into Europe, how has that impacted what the French see as their national identity? And the same in Britain. It was one of the preconditions, I think, that led to Brexit, is all this immigration from foreign cultures into Britain. There are worries that you're losing your national identity. So that is one of the bigger questions going forward. So on the immigration, the Syrian refugee crisis, something that's ongoing, is how do you justify assimilation into cultures, and what does it mean to be German or French or Italian or English when ethnically things are getting a little bit more complex in these countries. So one of those things that you do see is that with the growth of immigration also comes the growth of different cultures, but also perhaps a growth of the working class, and a class of people who perhaps need more government assistance getting started in their countries. So what European countries begin to expand is this welfare state. Post-World War II, European countries are going to look to take care of their citizens more by establishing large welfare states with social programs. We're talking Social Security, we're talking Medicare and Medicaid, or like the national equivalents in those countries, like the National Health Service in England. We're talking programs like food stamps. We're talking programs like unemployment insurance. All these things that government puts in as a safety net to help prop up the ones at the bottom. And to get this, you got to tax, right? You got to tax your wealthy citizens a high amount in order to build the revenue to be able to fund this welfare state. Well, when the economics of these countries kind of slow down in the 70s, conservatives like Margaret Thatcher are going to say, you know what, maybe we should be spending more money on national defense and let companies create these like safety net programs for themselves to compete for different workers. Okay, so that you don't have to spend so much money on, as a government, on social programs that perhaps some people abuse. Rather, you spend it on national defense, you spend it on infrastructure, you spend it on these other things, and let people keep more money in their pockets. So Thatcher is certainly one of those that pushes that idea. The thought is, as time goes on, the problem with the welfare state is that it's built on monies from working citizens, right? This is true in the United States too. So in the 1970s, you didn't have as many older people, but as the population is aging and as the baby boomers get into a higher stage of life, well, now you're going to have less people working and more people retired. How is the welfare state going to work if the taxes of those working people are not sufficient enough to cover the needs of the elderly or the infirmed or the sick or however old they are? So it's a question about how is this going to survive without even higher and higher taxation. Something to consider. We'll leave here with part one, and we'll stop here with the student revolts in 1968. So 68 was in particular a crazy year around the world in terms of a rebellion against authority. You have many different examples. We saw Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia as one. But you see widespread student revolts in France. And these students, why are they revolting? Why are they throwing up barricades and inspiring a giant, massive strike of workers as well across Paris and other urban areas? One, they're rejecting their parents' embrace of the capitalist economy that the West is so focused on in the heart of the Cold War. You know, not everybody's going to win with capitalism. There's going to be winners, there's going to be losers. So these students, very idealistic and seeing maybe the romantic charm of communism and the idea that everybody can be equal, are going to reject their parents' equality or embrace rather capitalism because of the lack, the inequality that exists in that system. More logistically speaking, they are also rebelling because of poor university conditions that they have to go through and have to exist in. So there's a revolt in the sense of trying to go against like the big picture, which is the acceptance of capitalism. There's a revolt against these different wars going on around the world in the context of the Cold War and other social unrest. But there's also poor conditions at universities, and this strike did not fare well for the students. However, conditions did improve in many of these universities going forward. So we're going to leave off there with part one of the final countdown. We'll come back and do a second part here soon. But again, that should give you more insight again for some of the social and economic issues happening here after World War II. So we'll see you in part two.